So next, we're now pivoting to our program, and we have right now we're going to have two features. One is a short segment, and then one is our full program. And that short segment is going to focus on national trends in affordable housing. And there's no better expert on that from his perspective is Jonathan Reckford, who's the CEO of Habitat for Humanity International, which is a post he's had since 2005. So, and fellow member, of course. So Jonathan Reckford, we'll welcome you to the screen. So glad to have you. And I love your background. I mean, before Habitat for Humanity, you did strategy at Disney and Best Buy, among other things. I know you were a pastor, and you're an author as well. Most recent book, Our Better Angels, about the virtues of success. Incredible thought leadership, and so we're excited to have you share some thoughts on affordable housing.
Great. Thank you so much, President Cannon. It's great to be with you all today. I want to start by telling you about my friend Boris. Boris grew up in circumstances most of us can hardly imagine. He lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a community called The Hole. There were shootings all the time. The family had no indoor plumbing, and Boris was struggling in school and failing first grade. And he's one of those kids who could have easily been written off. When he was in third grade, his mom qualified to buy a Habitat home, and they moved into Optimist Park. And I love the imagery of that shift of moving from The Hole to Optimist Park. But suddenly, for the first time, he had that stable, safe place to live and foundation. Turned out he was a really bright kid. And he was blessed with teachers and mentors who invested in him and saw that promise. And he ended up earning a full scholarship to Davidson College, then an MBA. He's had an impressive career in banking and then affordable housing and senior care. And he's, as far as I know, the first person who grew up in a Habitat home to serve on our global board of directors. And Boris is one of those people, if you're with him, you just feel better about our world, and he is making our world a better place. And I start with the story for several reasons. First, that imagery of transformation and what is possible. Second, his journey clearly illustrates the importance of housing. And finally, and maybe most importantly, it reminds us to make this personal. There's a face and a story behind all the data I'm about to share. Boris was going to be one of the children left behind until teachers and others refused to allow him to fail. Just as students need great teachers and caring mentors, they also need stable homes where they have a quiet place to study. Housing leaders have long known that a decent home can impact educational outcomes and a family's economic potential. The COVID-19 crisis has also made many more people aware that a decent home is critical to family and community health. How do you shelter in place without adequate shelter? We have a wonderful Habitat affiliate in Atlanta, one of our lighthouse affiliates led by Lisa Gordon and her great team, but I'm going to focus today on the national picture. We were already experiencing a tremendous housing crisis before the coronavirus. A 2020 report from Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies indicated that more than 37 million US households were cost burdened, meaning they pay more than 30% of their income on housing. And almost 20 million of those families are paying over 50%. The pandemic has exacerbated the problem. So housing is going to be a key part of economic recovery as we emerge from the health crisis. Investment in affordable housing as infrastructure has a huge multiplier effect, both directly and indirectly. In addition to the benefits the stable housing brings to families and communities, building homes creates jobs and increases property tax revenue. The National Association of Home Builders estimated in 2020 that building an average single-family home generates 2.9 jobs and roughly $130,000 in taxes. Separately, the racial reckoning we've experienced in this country in the past year has also emphasized how critical equitable housing policies are going to be in healing communities. If you aren't aware, after World War II, federal law mandated segregated housing and FHA redlining policies. That meant that large numbers of Black families missed out on the home value appreciation that moved so many white families into the middle class and created intergenerational assets. Housing is a major contributor to the racial wealth gap in our country, where 73.4% of white households are homeowners, as opposed to 42.1% of Black households. Home ownership over time is one of the best means of long-term wealth creation for many families. So if you care about inclusivity and equal opportunities for all, you have to care about housing. So many factors are at play when we talk about housing affordability. Home prices in 2/3 of US cities have hit record highs, and we're actually losing more affordable units to redevelopment than we're building each year. Places like Atlanta and Nashville and Houston used to be the best examples of affordable cities, but that is no longer the case. The cost of materials is going up very fast. Lumber increases alone have added $10,000 to the average house in the past year alone, and skilled labor is in short supply and increasingly expensive. The biggest issue, of course, is that the cost of land has accelerated far faster than incomes. In some communities, the regulatory environment also presents a problem. Fees for developers and protracted approvals make it hard to get things built. And then there's the NIMBY problem, not in my backyard. In California, in some places, it's actually banana. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. We have to change hearts and minds if we're going to change policies to create communities that are thriving and inviting for all. We need to promote YIMBY, yes in my backyard attitudes that recognize the worth of diverse residents in a community. We need to create more housing density along transit lines and look for ways to preserve affordable housing long-term. We need to look at policies that create sustainable plans for acquiring and developing land. And we need to advocate for policies that make it easier for developers to build housing for low and middle income families. I'm a firm believer in planning mixed income, mixed use communities. That ends up being the right answer for everyone. That allows people to live closer to work and creates the social mobility that all of us aspire to. That will require continuing to invest in historically underserved communities and opening up more opportunities for low-income families in high-opportunity communities. As a friend of mine says, I'm now going to go from preaching to meddling. But I'd ask, if you're willing to take heat from your neighbors and advocate for including low and middle-income housing in your community, what steps are you willing to take to open access to communities of opportunity all around the metro? We know that our city is one of the fastest gentrifying cities in the nation. And with property speculators swooping in, the market has changed. But we need inclusive growth. We need to improve the quality of life for residents of disinvested neighborhoods. And we need to make sure that low-income families are not pushed out of the places they call home, or if they move, that they're able to move to communities with good schools and job possibilities. We have to listen to residents and create connections within and among neighborhoods. At Habitat, we've seen many times how communities revitalized when residents help create a plan for making their community better. We believe we need the whole continuum of housing, but also that affordable home ownership is an important part of the mix, both for community stability and to ensure residents can build financial assets over time. I make no pretense that this is easy. It can only be done with the public, private, and social sectors working together. It'll take commitment, investment, and advocacy. And I would suggest that Atlanta Rotary is uniquely well positioned to help. So to sum up, if you care about health, you need to care about housing for all. If you care about equity and inclusion, it can't be done without addressing housing. And if we want to continue to grow our economy here in Atlanta and nationally, we have to have housing for all of our workforce. Think about all the children out there who could one day be telling stories like Boris's. They had the chance to grow into all that God intended for their lives. Then imagine how together we can make that a reality in our city. Thank you.
Jonathan, so well done. Your story of Boris going from the hole to Optics Park is such an image that's wonderful, that's easy to carry around. You were talking about preaching and meddling. We're lucky to have you at the helm, preaching and meddling for our nation and our world, and bringing housing, as you've outlined, it brings health, brings jobs, brings security, brings equity, brings wealth creation. Is such an important component. So thank you. And by the way, the acronym BANANA, I had not heard before. So that's a good one.
Yeah, thanks, Cannon.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. Really appreciate it. And Jonathan's opening here did so much to set up our program now. So I'm going to welcome Katharine Kelley to the screen. who can give us a quick introduction about the program. But Katharine, you need no introduction in some sense. Of course, you're president-elect for our club, so you and I spend a lot of time together. But for those of you who followed Katharine's career, she's been 27 years in the real estate industry, particularly in urban development and working now with Green Street Properties as president, focusing on neighborhood improvement. So, Katharine, you're right in the thick of things, and you're so thoughtful to help us set up our panel discussion today on affordable housing.
Great. Thank you so much, Cannon. It's great to be with everyone. When we, and Jonathan did such a fantastic job painting the national picture on this critical issue. When we look at how that issue now splashes down in Atlanta, we very much have this sort of similar tale of two cities. And it's interesting, you know, just a few weeks ago, Atlanta was ranked as the #1 market in the United States for the commercial real estate industry. And yet at the same time, Atlanta has also been ranked for several years as the #1 city for income inequality. And I think we have a slide, if Jens can bring that to the screen. You'll see a couple of statistics about how those same issues translate to Atlanta. But all of that overall creates a deficit of about 25,000 affordable homes that we need to create here in Atlanta. And that number is actually growing every year. I guess one thing that I have come to appreciate about this issue is the importance of addressing it holistically. And we are very fortunate today to have two of our fellow Rotarians who are doing just that. Each of these panelists that we have with us have very successful track records in the market rate commercial real estate industry. And they're now taking those same strengths and skills and applying them to the affordable housing arena. Margie Stagmeier, who is our first panelist, is often held up as a model practitioner. Margie is the founder of TriStar Real Estate and the president of TI Asset Management. Her firm has managed over 5 million square feet of commercial space and 3,000 residential units across the Southeast. And in a prior chapter, Margie also oversaw about $1.5 billion in institutional real estate funds. So she brings a particularly keen financial eye to this topic. Her current business model essentially focuses on targeting blighted apartment communities near failing elementary schools where she provides affordable housing, and then couples that with a whole series of community wraparound services such as affordable after school care. And I know she'll talk more about those issues as well, or about those services as well. Our next panelist, David Allman, comes to this issue from the capital side. David is the owner and chairman of Regent Partners, which has developed or acquired over $2.5 billion in assets. He's also known widely for his leadership at a regional level in such areas as the Metro Chamber, ULI, the Campbell Foundation, and even through his work on the alleviation of poverty in Nicaragua. David is coming to us today wearing his hat as the founding chairman of the Atlanta Affordable Housing Fund, which is a $25 million fund focused on providing low-cost debt for affordable housing. So two fantastic panelists. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
And I will also remind the audience to please send along your questions in the chat feature. We will gather those and circle back at the end of these initial questions. But Margie, why don't we start with you as our model practitioner? I know that a key part of increasing the supply of affordable housing is catalyzing more developers like you and understanding, you know, really what is working. You shared the other day a favorite case study of a project that has worked well, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that and maybe some of the factors that have contributed to its success.
Okay, so let's go into our first slide here. So what we focus on is existing housing. It's called NOAA. It's naturally occurring affordable housing. I call them legacy properties. They're properties typically built in 1960, 1970. Pretty much every community has them. When we talk about an affordable housing crisis, I also feel like we're having an aging housing crisis because a lot of these properties are now 50 years old and they're kind of out of style. They need to have a lot of capital work. But here's some examples of some that we've had in our portfolio over the years. When I look at these, if you look at the middle top one with the red kind of exterior, that was 446 units. That had 990 bedrooms, which could house 1,800 people in one apartment community. So we tend to think of these as small cities. Okay, you want to go to the next slide? So here's an example of one we bought in the city of Atlanta. We purchased it in 2018, 244 units, 1 and 2 bedrooms. And the top picture is phase 1. It was severely blighted, boarded up. I think 90% of the purchasers would have torn that down and put it in the trash. But we look at it as 108, and the down units were 108 units of housing that can be renovated for about 30 cents on the dollar of new construction. If you look at the bottom, that was phase 2, built in 1998. So you had 2 different property types here, but it was one community. You want to keep going. We paid $5.2 million for it. Here's the neighborhood. It's on Cleveland Avenue. So you can kind of see the bottom red area. That's the blighted area of phase 1. And then across the street on the left is phase 2, 100 units. That was built in 1998. But look at the top there. What's concerning to me about this property is it had one of the highest 9/11 call rates in 2017, the year before we bought it. We had over 270 violent crimes, gunfire, the gangs had taken over. And our children, we had 68 families still with children. They would walk to Cleveland Elementary every day and walk through a war zone. So some of these, we look at these neighborhoods as entire cities where you can't just address affordable housing, you really have to look at the whole neighborhood. So let's keep going with the slides. So this is where David's genius comes in. In order to buy these properties, it's very hard to get bank loans because of the high risk of the neighborhood. But we got creative. We needed to raise just under $12 million to purchase this deal. So we got $2.4 million from an impact fund that we put together where our average cost was 4%. City of Atlanta gave us a $1.5 million housing opportunity bond at 1%. Then we had a foundation give us a 0 interest rate loan, which was very innovative for this foundation. And then we talked a bank into giving us a bank loan. So our average cost of capital was 3.74%. If you go to the very bottom, I have 4 columns. At 3.74%, I can offer rents for roughly $803. If I had to pay, and if you go to the right, 11%, I would have had to raise my rents to $1,100 just to fund the capital. The average household income at this property when we purchased it was $28,000. That's what the residents were earning. So they could really only pay about $720 a month in rent. So you want to go to the next slide? So here's the property today, 2 years later. The crime is pretty much gone. We have 244 units completely renovated. We have partnered with dozens of partners. Kaboom and CarMax came down and actually built us that beautiful playground in the bottom middle slide. But our rents are now affordable for families earning between $30,000 and $35,000 a year in a completely renovated property that has a very robust community wraparound program. So if you keep going to the next slide. So this is Star C. What we do in our properties is it's not just about housing. As Jonathan said, housing impacts healthcare, it impacts education. So we partner with Star C. We do, in this particular property, we partnered with Atlanta Public Schools. We have free on-site after-school programs and summer camps where we follow the curriculum of Atlanta Public Schools and Dr. Payne at Cleveland Elementary. We also have partnered with Morehouse Medical. So all our residents have access to affordable health, dental, vision, and hearing. We do community gardens. And believe it or not, at one of our properties, we have a very robust farmers market now once a week during the summer. And then we also do eviction relief. We started that last year. It has now grown to over $4.5 million, 4.3, and we've helped 2,800 families. But we provide that stable environment with the wraparound services for our residents. So it's not just about affordable housing. We're really helping these families improve their lives. And then one final thing, we've had dozens and dozens, probably over 100 families now go into home ownership from our community. So we're very proud of that.
Sorry, I think I might have been muted. What a great story to share. And, you know, it was interesting in particular that spreadsheet where you showed the columns. And David, this sort of points to you. Obviously, the availability of capital for affordable housing is critical to the success of these projects. And you saw very specifically how that impacted that deal that Margie went through. Talk a little bit, if you would, about your work in the capital markets side, what you're seeing, some of the additional needs that you see out there. Just curious to know what's on your frontier.
Thank you, Katharine. As we're realizing, the market in and of itself cannot produce affordable housing in any material level without some type of subsidy. The low-income tax credits are an exception to that, but there's a cap to that. So I got involved in this through my involvement with a big tent effort called House ATL that was launched a few years ago. And it ended up making a number of recommendations to the city of Atlanta. And one of those was the need for more low-cost capital. So Mark Pollock and I, as seasoned, private sector real estate developers, said, well, maybe we ought to step up and see what we could do. And of course, from a private sector perspective, we're interested in how do we move the needle? How do we get to scale? We formed a year ago our Atlanta Affordable Housing Fund. I think that the primary goal was to demonstrate the ability of the private sector in general and the real estate professional community in particular to efficiently address these issues related to affordable housing or the lack thereof. And we hope that with this first fund, we will learn lessons. It will allow us to progress to larger funds so that we can, help contribute to the scaling of this. And we put together, kind of a blue chip board of seasoned real estate professionals and then seasoned it with some others as well. The fund itself is a $25 million fund. It's primarily a mezzanine debt fund. One of the reasons that we think real estate professionals should be on the point of the spear here is because, we understand about capital stacks, complicated capital stacks like Margie described. We understand risk. We understand operations. So we feel like we can bring kind of the credibility and the innovation to help tackle some of these issues. But, we're hoping, we charge about 3% for our debt. We go higher up the capital stack than banks will typically go. So we're replacing either non-existent or expensive equity. And basically we're trying to fill a gap in the capital structure. Our typical loan is going to be in the $2 million range. We've raised about half our funds, so we still have a ways to go, but we'll be closing on our third project this week. And our typical loan will be about $2 million. We're hoping to complete the raising of it in 21 and have it fully placed in by 22. But in addition to kind of social impact fund like ours, there's also a need in the capital formation for philanthropic funds. You saw this model demonstrated with the West Side Future Fund, where they had both sources of capital, and particularly as you go further down the income scale, the AMI scale, the more subsidy is required, and in many, if not most cases, a form of philanthropy will be needed. As you heard in Margie's case, where she's frequently dealing with 30 to 60% AMI, something like that. So you got the philanthropic funds, but it's also important what you do on the public funding side, like the city's housing opportunity bond that was recently announced. But we need other dedicated funding sources. Several states have robust housing trust funds. Florida has over $400 million in a state housing trust fund. The state of Washington has 300 million. So there are things that there needs to be a broad collaboration. When we think about scaling, you go from tens of millions to hundreds of millions, which is what we think it really will take to really move the needle. We'll have to start looking at getting into the corpus of foundations and pension funds and the kind of assets under management of high net worth individuals. If we just took 1% of the corpus, whether this is individual or institutional, that would raise enormous amounts of money and would have a negligible effect, since this would be coming from fixed income assets, low return assets, into similar yielding assets that would have negligible effect on returns and yet make a world of difference. So I think we've got to start thinking outside the box, and hopefully over time, as we demonstrate success of what we can do with modest sizes of funds, we can escalate up. But also just think about what we could do if we got our apartment community together and they gave 1%, they dedicated 1% of their units to affordable units. Overnight, you could create, tens of thousands of affordable units just out of almost thin air. So I think there's some creative things that we need to do. But I think the good news is Atlanta is well on its way with a very strong public-private collaboration. If you look at the Community Foundation of Greater Atlanta, Frank Fernandez came in. He was one of the initiators of the House ATL effort when he was with Blank. They've made a major commitment to social impact investing. But the foundations we're talking to all of them, and they're all actively doing deals or looking at how they can play in this space. I know at the Campbell Foundation, where I sent, we'll have 3 specific affordable housing deals on our next quarter's agenda. But the Atlanta City for Progress is talking about this. Of course, the city. I mean, we talk a lot with the Housing Authority, with the Beltline, with Invest Atlanta, with the Housing Trust, the Land Trust over there. So there is enormous collaboration going on. One of the outcomes of that is a funders collective now, literally where quarterly there's a venue where project sponsors can bring a deal to the table, and you'll have a myriad of potential funders there, ranging from groups like us for social impact investing to the banks that will do the kind of core primary debt lending. And we've seen the nonprofit developers come together and give us a list of pipeline deals. So we've got a list of 20-something deals that are not all shovel ready, but they're in some stage of pre-development. We need to do more. We need to attract more for-profit developers to this if we're gonna tackle this and move the needle. But we're in the process of building a very robust ecosystem here in Atlanta. And so I think if we really have the political will and the civic will to do this, I think we have people at the table. The resources are out there, and if we can continue to collaborate, I think we can really be a leader in how cities address this.
Terrific. Thank you. It's encouraging to hear how many local players and national players are really stepping up on the capital side of this equation. Just one quick question to Margie, and then I know we need to shift to some of our audience questions. Again, if we're trying to scale this effort, 25,000 deficit of affordable units. Margie, can you talk a little bit about some of the policy hurdles that you have seen and perhaps some ways that we can eliminate those policy hurdles? I know that that's an important step in encouraging more developers like you to enter the space on the supply side.
So this was my first deal using any kind of federal or city funding. And there's all these regulations. There's 669 pages long of regulations just to deal with ADA and handicap. So I'd say the regulatory environment has been so layered for 50 years since most of them started in 1969. And then, of course, the permitting through the city of Atlanta was just such a challenge. Atlanta uses 2 different codes, and the codes contradict each other. And I think we just need, as a city, to really have a hard conversation about this, how we can streamline it. Because like I said earlier, there is an aging housing crisis on top of the affordable housing crisis. And we need to renovate these units rather than just think one day we're going to tear them all down and rebuild them.
Agreed. Yes. It's daunting. And I know, and we appreciate how much you are really pioneering that effort to sort of plow through all of this regulatory process. So let's look at a question that's come in, and either Margie or David, feel free to answer this. How will some of the smallest providers of low-cost housing survive the long period of non-payment?
Well, I'll answer this one. Well, we saw this coming, and Star C started an eviction lab actually in 2019. And we brought Georgia Power, Atlanta Apartment Association, nonprofits, tenants to the table to look and see if we could build a platform for addressing rental assistance, because even in our rents are $700 a month. We see families struggle to pay even $700 a month. And then fast forward COVID, and as everyone's aware, last year, a lot of the counties around Atlanta got hundreds of millions of dollars, and they allocated some of it to rental assistance. I was just in a meeting this morning in Cobb. They just got another $22 million. Star C has raised $4.5 million, but there's a lot of organizations out there that are raising money to help tenants pay their rent. And I do think it's taken a big bite out of the apple. So the next year, I think a lot of residents will have assistance. They just need to be ready to go and have their paperwork done. So there's relief out there, at least for the year 2021.
That's true. And I know, so many fellow Rotarians are involved in and around this space. I know that our Rotary Chair Moody is involved in some of the resources to protect residents and helping to support some of the initiatives that you just talked about, Margie. Let's see, another question. Margie, it looks like this one's for you as well. Here. So crime is top of mind with low-cost housing. How did you address that variable in providing these new communities that you've been putting together?
This is one of the most important things when you're dealing with high crime communities, is you have to know how to sequence your capital. If you have significant crime, which we did, I mean, the drug dealers had basically taken over the property. We had car theft rings, the list goes on. If you try to go in there and start replacing roofs, replacing air conditioning, renovating, it's going to be sabotaged. So the very first thing you have to do is you have to hit crime really, really hard. We partnered with the Atlanta Police Foundation. My partner Duncan is actually on the board, and Atlanta Police Department. We put in $45,000 worth of security cameras. We were very, very fortunate that the Atlanta Police Department worked with us, formed a partnership. We had 24/7 security at the property, at least until it stabilized. It took us a year and a half to get it stabilized. The one thing missing in the component was the judicial system. I mean, we had the same guys be arrested and, within 48 hours are back on the street, but we were persistent. And then once we got the crime stabilized and the community safe, then we could start investing the capital. So it was a heavy lift. It took us about two years to really get this property stabilized. But we were able to keep a lot of the tenants that were living there. 68 families were able to keep their children at Cleveland Avenue Elementary. So we think it's a success story, but we're not letting our guard down. We've got to really keep on top of the security and the crime, but it's pretty much gone now.
That's great. I mean, all of those are such great examples of addressing this whole issue holistically. And, David, I'm going to turn and tap into your holistic perspective as well. Obviously, housing is just one slice of the financial pie for any household. And many other factors, transportation, job creation, utilities, food, and so forth, all are important contributors to the financial pie for any household. How can we take a larger picture perspective on tackling this issue? And I'm curious from your regional perspective, as you worked on so many of Atlanta's needs as a metro area.
Catherine, as both Jonathan and Margie had pointed out, there are a number of issues that have a big impact on housing affordability and how that fits into kind of a thriving opportunity. Education, transportation. I mean, we've got our underserved neighborhoods need access to the job centers and to local amenities. And so we've got to look at micro mobility, as well as, bus routes and transit type of options. Margie's, education model is so compelling as well. I guess what I would say is, many of the challenges that we talk about that are part of this holistic picture, many of them, if not most of them, can be addressed successfully at the local neighborhood level. And so when you think of neighborhoods like Eastlake, you think of the South Atlanta neighborhood with FCS, the Cousins, of course, in Eastlake. They incorporate education. You think of Drew Charter, what they're trying to do with the Carver cluster in South Atlanta. So, but they have an affordable housing strategy at that level. So they bring in healthcare partners. So I do think from looking at this holistically, if the closest thing that I've identified that is a silver bullet is to help resource these neighborhoods that have strong leadership. They're able to attract resources, both human and financial resources, and are able to create recreate the fabric of community into thriving neighborhoods. So when we think about these things and income, even job training, right? How do you give low-income families that want to have upward economic mobility the ability to get the better paying jobs? That we've got tens of thousands of jobs, high-paying jobs that go unfilled. A lot of these people that are living on the margin do not have the financial margin to not keep the second job, to get the certification course, whatever it is. So I think we need more innovative NGOs and funding for people to give them the financial margin so they can get the training they need to get these better jobs. Good neighborhood organizations know how to connect their residents to these type of things. So I just think continue to invest in these neighborhood leadership organizations that have these holistic strategic plans that are on the ground, committed to the long term, and that's a big part of it. This is a lot of these solutions. Certainly, the ones we control are local issues and have local solutions. So this is ultimately, Atlantans for Atlanta, and if we all commit to doing something, I think we can make enormous difference.
That's terrific. It's a great call to action. I have one final question from the audience, and David, probably back to you or Margie. Are the returns for investors of these investments lower than more new traditional real estate investments?
They are. It's why it's called a social impact fund. Is that you're willing to accept a lower return because of the triple bottom line or the social impact it's giving. So the good news is there's no lack of demand for the product you're creating. So occupancy is not an issue. So it takes one of the risk variables off. But we generally tell our investors, look for a 3 to 4%. But we think we'll compete with bond yields, certainly even better than money market yields. But you're not going to get a traditional, kind of high single digit or low teens type of more traditional real estate investor. But you're looking to make a difference. You really cannot make a difference in the capital stack if your cost of capital is not significantly less than market.
Yeah. Margie, any thoughts from you on that question? What your expectations are?
Yeah, and I tend to agree. It's all numbers. It's affordable. That's the first word in affordable housing. It has to be affordable across the board, and the capital just has to be lower cost capital. Otherwise, you just have to pass it through and raise your rents, which destabilizes communities. So I agree with everything David said.
Great, thank you. And I guess one more question for you, Margie, and then I know Cannon will have a question coming up here. David talked a little bit about call to action, and I'm curious, if I'm a Rotarian, what can I do? Just an individual Rotarian, any suggestions to to help embolden people to help tackle this very complicated issue?
So, like I said earlier, we're many cities. We look at these large apartment communities. Some of them have thousands of people. Most of them are low income, and everyone's in their lane. And when I look at Rotary, I'm just love going to the lunches, which I miss, because I can meet so many different lanes. I mean, we've had dozens of nonprofits work with us. Georgia Power, for example, has a program, Energy Efficiency for All, where they came in, replaced all the light bulbs, wrapped pipes, and we were able to save about $20 to $30 a month. Morehouse Medical came in and did medical drives. Georgia Tech, the students did a whole class around studying how do you create community capital and ethics in residential design. So within your own lane, if you could just really focus on what you can do for housing and families that live in low income housing communities and connect with Star C or connect with TriStar. I mean, that's my call to action. And the one thing I do see missing, as David alluded to, is foundation capital. In 2017, housing was number 12 on the list where foundations invested. But I think it's a tremendous return if they do start really looking at investing in affordable housing. Thank you, Katharine.
Absolutely. No, and you know, as you both have said, and Jonathan as well, there is such a ripple effect for that investment. Completely agree. I think that, oh, there's Cannon.
Well, great topic. And I know we're at the top of the hour, but I mean, there's just such great information flow here. Katharine, one question I was going to ask is how can our club get involved? And Margie, you started answering that, and I want to come back to that. But just one other question too, just between rental and ownership. What is the best model? I'm sure it's not that easy an answer. Does it kind of vary on the community itself? Maybe just 30 seconds on that.
Well, I think Habitat, Jonathan, being with Habitat is just a tremendous model to help people create net worth. We found that by keeping rents low, families were able to save. And, like I said, we have a lot of families going to home ownership. Probably, I think we had about 45 at one property last year. So, it's how you create net worth. It's how you become a middle class, is being able to build out assets through home ownership rather than just renting. Plus, you get a great tax write-off.
Absolutely. Well, and I was talking about just for initial maybe stability, what kind of creates the best path to that state. But well, great. And then just last thought, and then we'll sign off. We do have club members who do want to get involved and in our lane be able to make a contribution. What is the best way to kind of connect? Is it when we're together in Loudermilk, maybe it's easier, but is it to reach out to you, Margie, you, David, you, Katharine? Is that a good way to start, or someone can come to me and I can steer them in a direction?
All of the above. There's plenty of room for everyone.
Yeah,
I want people's radars up and be able to go. So, well, great. All right. Well, awesome discussion. Thank you very much. This is a topic that I know we've been spending decades on, and we're making progress in many respects, particularly with the lessons you all have learned and are sharing with us. So we look forward to leaning in over the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, David and Margie.
Thank you.